You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik.
Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Erik Johnson, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Josh Mead, who is in Senegal, West Africa. Happy New Year, Josh. How's it going?
Happy New Year to you. It's going great, and I hope your family's doing well. We are enjoying some cooler weather these days in January. It gets quite cool, and I'm sure you guys are enjoying just a little bit of time off during the Christmas and New Year season, but getting ready to get back into the things of, the routine. Are your kids back doing homeschooling?
They are. In fact, I have this very fake background. You may hear noises in the background as I am doing our podcast today in our office. I told them I'm going to be doing a podcast. If you have to come in, be quiet. So, we're right back in the swing of things, trying to get school full bore, and very excited for 2026. We have a lot of life things happening. Our daughter, Lord willing, will be going off to college later this summer. Don't even want to talk about that, but so much looking forward to this year if God tarries. To see what he has in store for us. And, one of the exciting things in the life of a church is when you start building your ministry, Josh, and you start getting excited, maybe even start thinking about the next step in ministry, buying some land, building a building, having a facility. And we got some great questions from a BIMI missionary. I just looked him up. I think his name is Mark Mariner. I believe he's in Suriname. And he sent us 5 questions that are really great questions that we don't necessarily think we're experts on, but we do have experience on it.
Sure.
And we'd like to tackle those questions and maybe give our insight, our perspective, and some suggestions to this faithful missionary.
Yeah, and I think our answers may be a little different. I have some generic answers that would kind of be the obvious answers, and I think some of your answers are going to be more strategic given your location and the demographic you're reaching. And then, of course, I'm going to answer in the context of working where we are working, specifically targeting a more Muslim demographic. And if I didn't post the video on our social media pages, but if you didn't get a chance, go back and listen to the audio. The last 2 episodes, I did a discussion with a colleague here where we live, and we were discussing Islam and just discussing some theological views, some frameworks. This year, we'll be going back to the States. I already sent out our prayer letter, and I'll be conducting some seminars on Islamic evangelism. And so if you attend a church that supports us and you'd be interested in having us host, and if you want to host an Islamic seminar, we'd be happy to do that. We have materials that help just how to engage with Muslims with the gospel. But of course, whether you are reaching a demographic that is majority Catholic or agnostic or Muslim, the question always comes up once you're ready to buy a building, how do you approach that? And so I think, Erik, we're going to talk a little bit today, just kind of talk shop on buying land, purchasing land. When do you know is the right time? Where do you purchase it? And we'll kind of go through his questions that Mark sent in. Really appreciate these questions that he sent. And we'll just have a discussion here.
And before we even start with the questions, I think the fact that he's just asking veteran missionaries suggestions or ideas is probably the best key for Mark. I did that as a much younger man. I still do it. And I think, there's definitely wisdom in a multitude of counselors and just learning from other people. I mean, I can think of nuggets and tidbits I got 20 years ago that I still pass on to other people and say, hey, someone told me this. I thought this was very smart, and I've kind of always thought this is a good rule of thumb. They're rule of thumbs. They aren't the gospel. You have to follow it. But just wisdom in that. And I think the first question, Josh, what is the first question? I have my answers here, but what is the first question we have there today?
Okay, so he emailed us and said he was wondering if we had any suggested resources for navigating a building project. How do we plan the facility effectively? And then how do we raise funds to bring about our vision once it's planned out? And so he kind of, and then there's several questions that he has here that kind of go one after another, but just kind of give a general, when did you know that you needed to build, you needed to buy land and build, because how many years was it before you had a building project that you initiated from the time you landed and began evangelism?
So we landed February 14th, 2009. And so then we purchased our first piece of property would be, let's see, I think it was July of 2013. So it was 4 years.
Okay.
Um, looking back, I thought it was a long period of time. I think as missionaries, when you're in your first work, everything seems like it's not going as fast as you want it to go. In hindsight, now nearly 20 years later, and with the perspective of many other missionaries that have been around, it actually was very quick. It was actually
Okay.
very quick
Yeah.
for our area, our price range, everything on this island for the ministry, how quickly ministries usually go. 4 years was actually a pretty quick time frame. And let's see, 1 year from purchasing the property, we were actually able to start building on it. So that took another year and then 6 months of building. So, from the time we landed to the time we got into our first church service was a good 5 years from being here, which, if you had told me once we landed, I thought, well, that's a pretty good long time. But now with hindsight, it seems like it's been quite some time. But knowing that, I think from the very beginning with the first work, once we had it going, I was already looking for land. I didn't like paying the amount of rent that we were paying. In fact,
Sure.
when we looked for where we were going to start a church, I looked at the same time, not only places to rent, but if there were places to purchase land. So it was kind of my mentality in the beginning. We get into it a little later on, but with Pastor Elias's church, which is our third church, we did a little differently. We bought the land, used the property for a couple of years, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on. But it wasn't until a little later on that I knew it was time to build. So we can get into the nuances. Every ministry is differently there. But I'll say this. There's one key factor when I thought about this, and you can piggyback on this. You'll know when the ministry's ready by just sometimes the circumstances of the ministry, how big it is, the necessity, the people's disposition to be involved with it. But your life needs to be ready for it,
Mhm.
and your finances. Both your life, your finances, and the ministry. All three things have to kind of be clicking. You may have financially doing well at a time, but if your life, there's some things going on with the family where you need to be making trips back and forth, or there's some sickness, or whatever the life situation may be, or the ministry is just not simply ready for it. I think those three keys kind of have to be in order and sync, and you will know that. There'll be a piece about, wow, it's time to do this. And you also know when the door is closing for the time to be looking for that. So make sure those three things, your life, your finances, and your ministry, because it will be a taxing to your finances. If anything, you're just a bridge to get things back and forth.
Yeah, you'll raise support and God will provide. God always provides the resources for the vision if you know that God has given you the vision. And I think that's what's essential as well. You need to know you're walking through an open door that God has provided for you. And God has promised to take care of the needs of his missionaries. And beyond that, God, if he's given you a vision, will help you to fulfill and accomplish that. But at the same time, you're right, Eric. It needs to be something where you understand your personal resources as well are going to be affected by your personal income, your income by income support, because there's always going to be little things in the budget that you need here. Maybe not enough came in. You need an extra $1,000. My wife and I, whenever we started a building project, there were a couple things. Obviously, we begin with prayer together on moving forward with this, and understanding that this is going to be this project will consume my time. So I'm going to be dedicating the next few months, even up to a year, where the majority of my time is going to be dedicated to this building project. And so you need to make sure you can balance family time, the building project, and continuing in ministry, but as well, just understanding that, do you have the flexibility with your support, trusting the Lord to provide your needs, but every once in a while you'll have to use some of your personal funds to do that. Of course, as a missionary, you're more than willing to do that. We would always dedicate a certain amount before we announced a building project. My wife and I would agree on what we wanted to give personally. And then it was always amazing. I don't know, for Eric, for me personally, whenever I venture out into a major project where I need to raise a lot of funds, God always seems, and this is just something the Lord did as a grace to me is he would always provide the initial like 10% of what we need for the budget without me even asking anybody about it. I might get a random, we need this thing and it's going to cost us $50,000, and like $5,000 comes in for a random project without prompt. And so even just recently, we need to raise some extra funds for the ministry in Gambia. And I have a set amount that I want to raise. And already 30% of that has come in, and I haven't even sent out a request for these raising these funds. So it's always exciting to see how God answers prayer. And I always tell missionaries, when you're moving forward with a project, with a transition, with whatever it might be, is there a need, which means there's a door that God is opening, and then is God answering very specific prayers? Be specific in your prayers. And if God is answering specific prayer requests, he's giving you this vision and there's a legit need, then I think as you move forward, you can trust the Lord with that vision. Julie and I just read the other day in Psalms where David said that when you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your work to the Lord and he will bring it to pass. So just simple principles of if I'm passionate about pursuing God and fulfilling a vision God has given me, then I can trust my passions that the decisions I make are the right decisions because I know my motive is to do what God desires me to do. And that might be a decision you and your wife have quite often. How do we know what's God's will, when it's God's will to make a decision? And so with Building Project, Eric, you hit the nail on the head. And I would just say, be specific in your prayers and know that this is a definite need as you move forward.
And as we get to the second question, it has more to do with the land itself. So you kind of come to the point now, you think, okay, we need this. We need to do something. What do I do? Well, I need to purchase land. And it's a simple question. How do you choose a plot of land? But man, this is probably for me the most important step. When God's kind of giving you the green light to go forward in your heart, you prayed about it, you have a peace about it. For me, and in fact, the reason it's probably so fresh in my mind is I'm doing this right now. We're endeavoring, if God wills, to buy the biggest piece of land we ever have because we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to build a Baptist camp. A few other ministries involved with it, and I'm sure in every country it's different, but I'm sure in every country there's similarities. This is one of the most important questions, is because it has to do. There's a lot of pitfalls. One obviously is price. It's got to fit in your range. You know, we personally have never gone into debt
Right.
to purchase things and build things.
Right.
I understand there are times and ways, there's avenues where people maybe will lend you something. Well, that's between you, your pastor, your mission board. I understand that, but as a personal conviction of ours, we've always done it debt free. So
Mm-hmm.
we've always had to raise the money ahead of time, save in many cases, and sometimes for years. But once you've kind of gotten the range, there's a lot of other issues in our country. One of the biggest problems is not necessarily the price, although that's an issue, but it's actually documentation, that is proper title, that's
Mm-hmm.
actually owned. There's a lot of people who will falsify titles or not have the proper, documentation for it to be legitimate. That's a really big problem here. So we work. I mean, I go to so many properties that I like, and they say, "Oh, this price range is good." And then you get your lawyer involved. He's like, "This is not any good. Like they don't have the right documentation, or they have to
Right.
pay taxes in 20 years." So that's really key. But location as well, and the location for your vision. This is the step that really requires a lot of thought, a lot of looking forward, and I think God gives that to missionaries, the ability to look forward, and to see how the town is sprawling, or how the development's going to be in 10, 15 years. And that takes a lot of looking at other parts of towns and other
Right.
towns. And this is really the key, where you don't want to just be willy nilly on this. And there are some times when I've heard missionaries, my pastor told me a story of a missionary in Africa who had been there, I think he's been there 40 years, about 5, 10, 15 years ago. He just was so successful at purchasing property and getting churches planted. He would go into towns where he thought there needed to be a church and buy a piece of land in a certain strategic place and not even build a church for a number of years.
Right.
And so that can happen depending how much money you have. But right here, this is the part where you want to take time, really prayerfully think about the future, and make a wise decision. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've discussed this with our leadership here, our national pastor. His dad was led to Christ in the early 90s, one of the first Wolof believers to convert from Islam to Christianity. And we were discussing one day about land purchase and even when you're small in number, should you buy property in advance? They struck oil off the coast, so property prices are going up. And we can see a vision for the future. There's going to be a need for larger property. And actually we just had a church service, Christmas Eve service out at our new property in our new church building, which is difficult to access. We'll talk about that in a minute because it's kind of isolated, which is a bad idea, but for the future, it's going to be a great location. And we had about 60, we had just bought brand new chairs, about, I think 50 chairs, and we filled them up for that Christmas Eve service. And so already we're seeing just God do an incredible thing. But I was talking with our national pastor here, and he said, the Catholics, when they came in, they bought a piece of property, and of course they have resources, but they bought property in every single village in town that is a major access point. They haven't even developed a fraction of it, but they have the property. And of course it's worth who knows how much now, because it's been, how many decades since the Catholic Church has come in here. And so I think I found a letter written by J.B. Godfrey from 1974, I think, 74 or 75. I found it here at the office, at the old office. And basically it was his assessment after the survey trip of whether they should buy property or not. And his conclusion was that Senegal was not stable enough for the mission to pursue purchasing property, which is a shame because when this property was purchased, it was for a very good price. The church bought it back in the 90s, and there was nobody here. There was nobody surrounding it. If I was to step outside the door and take 5 steps, I'd be in the neighbor's house. It's very crowded and it's grown up. And when we started looking for new property to expand, because we've outgrown our location, we could not find anything in town because prices are soaring. They struck oil off the coast. So this property is very valuable. We were able to build this building, but we were able to find some property outside of town, which was a decent price. It's already gone up in value. And so there are multiple reasons why we purchased property where we did. But again, there's a lot that to take into consideration. I was actually reading, Eric, some mission organizations kind of had a few criteria that they recommend when you're looking for purchasing property. So I'll just list these real quick and let me know, did you take these things into consideration as you look for property or as you purchase property in the past? So number 1 is population access. Is the proximity of the location? Is it close to people that you are trying to reach? Number 2 was visibility and legitimacy. You just covered that a little bit, making sure the proper paperwork is in place. And then is it visible? Where we are right now, when they purchased the property, where I'm sitting right now, when they purchased the property, it was visible to the road because nobody was here. Now you can't see us or find us because we're about 5 houses in from the main road. And so we're not very visible. People find us anyways, and God still grows, and actually turned out for the better in an Islamic context. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, the visibility thing, I will say, you and I 20 years ago, we probably went to church planning conferences where you heard the expression location, location, location.
Right.
I think in the last 20 years that's changed because of digital access. People
Sure.
at any moment can tell you where they're located. And so if you've got a way to promote yourself and tell you where you're at, we're on a dead end street. I was worried about that. It has never been a problem for us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You're right. Even here in Senegal, it's you can ping yourself on Google Maps. People can find you easily. So legal security, we talked about that, ownership, zoning, future expansion rights. I think that's important too. Just try to keep in mind, you think, okay, we don't need a large place because we've outgrown where we're at. We don't want to pay rent. It's so high. It just makes sense to buy a piece of property. We'll take into consideration too, what about 20 years down the road when the church needs an extra classroom space for the growing children's ministry? Okay, so exactly. Yep. Yep. Is it, make sure the foundation is strong enough to add on and keep going up. So take all that into consideration, infrastructure realities. And this is going to, again, depend on where you're located. If you're in a rural village area, in the middle of Uganda, well, obviously you take what you get. We have a friend that worked with us here in Senegal. He's from Gambia, actually, originally. He's now in Guinea-Bissau, and he moved there. He married a woman from that area, and the village chief from where his wife was from said, "Hey, if you'll come and start a church, we'll give you property." And so he's meeting there. He's already got, he's been there maybe 2 years now. He's got about 50 people that meet. And I'm looking forward to visiting there in the near future and seeing the work as it's growing there. And so, yeah, it just depends on all that. Infrastructure is important especially if you're in a city area. And then cultural sensitivity. Just ask, what's the presence of a Christian structure? How will it be perceived in this specific area? We built a house initially because we're 2 doors down from a mosque. There's no church in our region. And if we were to build a church-like structure that looks like a church, we just wouldn't get anybody to come. We were here to reach Muslims, so we built a house. And our church meets in this house. We have offices on the main floor. We have a large building where we meet. This, the studio here. We do lots of filming, recording. Upstairs, we have our apartment where my family and I live. And on the roof, there's a classroom where my wife teaches the kids. We have a play area. And so we built this targeting our demographic, knowing that if we were to build a church building, that wouldn't be well received in this neighborhood. And so now we have a church building outside of town. And I'll let you talk a little bit because then I'm going to talk about why we moved in an isolated area. So why don't you respond to some of those main points there?
We went all those things you said. We went through. I pretty much can check all those boxes. I think that one thing I also would add, if you have a church family,
Mhm.
listen to them as well. Include them in the decision making, even if it's not like they're making all the decisions as far as the purchasing and those sorts of things. For instance, we rented a place, we bought our property. Actually, before we bought our property, we were using another facility that was being lent to us, an old church building, and I actually liked it. It was not very far from where I wanted our. It was actually right where I wanted our church to be, and I thought, wow, we might just buy this facility. It was an old Presbyterian church not being used, and I kind of floated that idea to the church members. And what we come to find out was they didn't really like the area that much for nighttime activities. There was a stigma because there had been a famous murder in that area. And so when I kind of had to listen to them, like, these are our pillars of our church. And if I start having nighttime revivals, they're not going to want to come out, and no matter how much I kind of fight to explain things, I think that was kind of the stigma. So I listened to the congregation and started looking for property elsewhere. Found a good piece of property, probably not even more than a kilometer or two away, 1 kilometer away as a crow flies.
Mhm.
And yet, when I showed them that property, because it was a little more safer area, they're like, "Oh, this is great." And so I felt like that's something I pass on to young guys. Listen to those around you, people who are faithful to the church.
Right.
They'll kind of let you know what they think of the idea. Ultimately, the leader sets the agenda, but there is a you want people to be comfortable with your decisions as well.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, you want to make sure that it's a place people feel safe and they want to come. I remember speaking with, I think it was Edgar Fagelli, who's does mission work in the Middle East, and he was talking about when they first were able to go into a pretty closed country when it opened up. Even though for a time period they were able to go there openly and freely share the gospel and start churches, they still, where their church met, they would park trucks, like 5, 6, 7 trucks in front of the doorway for obvious reasons because of the danger of where they were working. And so, but that being said, yeah, there's a lot to take into consideration. We went ahead and purchased property outside of town. One, because we couldn't find anything in town. Two, because of the future development of our city. Our city is expanding, it's growing, and there are a couple things that we took into consideration. Number one, the price was great. We bought a pretty large piece of property for the church building, and on that property, we have a church building that could probably we could probably have about 150 people in that church building. So it's able to grow and expand. We have an apartment for somebody to live on property. We built a large chicken coop to have some way for people to make money there, and then we have a big playground that where the kids can go and play, which is really, the kids love that. It's a lot of fun having that available for the kids. But there's no road right now. There's roads out there, but the city doesn't take buses out there yet because there's not enough residents living out there. And so we thought, okay, the price is good. We started construction. We don't know how long it's going to take for everything to develop out there. People can walk out there that are nearby. It is outside of town, but there's a growing community around us, and it's continuing to expand. They're building a highway from the Capitol that's going to go right by our property to the airport for our city, and so that's all incoming in the future. And so we thought, okay, let's do that. And then this is a large development where once people start buying homes and moving into this area, we're already there. So while the majority of our neighbors are going to be Muslim, if we're already there, nobody can say, "Hey, you guys came in and you don't belong here," this and that. We're already established. We're actually the first ones to actually operate out there and be out there. So that's a big advantage, especially when we're doing church planting and evangelism in an Islamic context. And so we took a lot of those things into consideration as we built. And then I'll just add this, because of the Islamic context, we want to balance privacy for the church when we have our meetings, but then have an area that's more accessible to receive Muslims for Bible studies. A lot of times Muslims won't go to a church. So we actually bought 2 properties out in that area, and 2 separate properties. And the property where the church is, that's exclusively for the church. We don't do outreach there. We're not having, but that's not how we reach Muslims. The church is for the church. That property is just for our church and the gathering of the believers. And then a little further away, we have another property we're going to develop where we're going to have classroom space for Islamic evangelism, discussions, forums, interaction with Muslims, things like that, where they can come, but it feels more like just a cultural center. It's not an actual church building.
That's exciting. And all that kind of goes along with number 3, which number 3, once you've had your property, is how do you make a master plan for the facility? Well, number 2 and number 3 are really kind of connected. Once you've got the idea for having a piece of property, you will have to have a visionary mindset of what are we going to put on this property. And, I think Ben Franklin said they're not making any more of this, talking about dirt, saying the idea you have to have enough property to fulfill your vision. I've seen so many missionaries, and even I this week was sitting at our own church thinking about ways we can maneuver things and build things to maximize the space we have. And that's why it's so important to get enough property. Don't be afraid to go out. If the Lord's giving you this vision, don't be afraid to go on faith to get a bigger piece of property than you even think, because sometimes God will expand the vision. Obviously, there's finances involved, and you have to make that work. But honestly, there's almost no problem having more property than you think. The master plan, however, is different. And this is where we'll talk a little bit more of the nuance, a little more into these questions. But how do you make a master plan? Well, first of all, you need to have a vision, what you're going to put on it. Josh went through a litany of different things. He came up with a master plan that, for his cultural setting, decided we need to have 2 properties because we don't want to have all this on the same property. You may live in a different culture like ours where you can have it all in one. In fact, I'm looking at a piece of property trying to get somewhere between 15 to 20 acres where we're going to have basically an evangelistic outreach / camp, but also take a sliver of that for a future church, and the church will have their own private side to it. But we can do all that on the same property. So it just depends on your cultural setting. Another suggestion when you get to the stage, though, is to get people to help you. Very few people are experts at making master plans. Very few are experts. Missionaries are experts in building construction. They may have some experience at it. Maybe you work as an electrician or you work as a plumber. I did some of that, but I certainly wasn't an engineer. I certainly wasn't an architect.
Right.
And so one suggestion I would also suggest is look at other ministries that are like-minded, that you are really aspiring to be. Like maybe they're 20, 30, 40 years down the road, but you look at that as that is a symbol of something you want to be like, and take a look at them. May not even be exactly independent Baptist, but they're making an impact in the spiritual sense. There's a lot of Christian camps on this island that aren't Baptist, but we've used had to rent, and I've gone to them. I'm looking at them and trying to follow some of the patterns uh, that they have as far as infrastructure goes. And so get that master plan by first sitting down, praying about it, thinking about what you want to do 20, 30, 40 years in the future, but then get people involved who know, architects, engineers you can trust, either Christians or they are trustworthy people. Get other missionaries, maybe from other countries, but there's a parallel in there that you can
Hmm.
lean on them for advice, how they went through it. I didn't realize this, but we went through our first construction project. I was pretty frazzled, I guess. And my teammate at the time, months later said, I thought you were going to have a nervous breakdown. Well, I didn't realize that's how it was for him, but I guess it was. And so the next two projects we did, I made sure that I really didn't get that close to that, and made the proper steps so that I wouldn't have a breakdown. And so that would be my advice. Get a lot of help. Take as much time with the master plan as you do with the property to make sure you lay it out correctly. And that's the next question we'll tackle on it. But Josh, you respond to that one.
No, yeah, definitely. Those are, again, it goes with the vision of and the needs. And so always try to think 20 years down the road, what can we do to expand? As you're putting this together, just try to make it as, not generic, but you want to make it as flexible as possible, what you can use the property with, and what's the main functions of your ministries and your needs as you're putting this thing together. A place to worship, a place for teaching and discipleship, and your training, your outreach, all of that. And so as you're putting it together, yeah, definitely do a lot of research, and ask questions, and just find out what works for others, and what you need, and what will work for you. When we built this, of course, like I mentioned already, our first building project was we built it like a house so we could receive people. We had a kitchen where we could prepare meals, and we had a center area with couches where we could drink tea with people and have discussions. We had a media room where we showed videos, set up a library, and then we had back rooms with offices, space, and all that. So yeah, whatever, really take all that in consideration and try to just ask a lot of questions.
All right. Well, we are running out of time, and it's going to be tough to tackle these last two quickly, but I think we can tackle number four. Number four is really about how to break up the project into small pieces, manageable phases. And that's actually the answer is kind of in the question, which is make sure you have a master plan that has phases. Don't have it like we can't use this thing until we've built the most expensive part or whatever. Like really think it through. Think about your cultural setting. I'll give you an example. Pastor Elias says we bought the property and didn't use it for 6 months, and then when we did, we just basically put some poles and some zinc and built them a bathroom. And for 2.5 years, they basically developed the land, developed everything, had church there until we realized, okay, now we're ready to go to the next step. And so have in your mind ways where you can make it functionable at the most basic level, and then just kind of divide it into phases yourself. And that kind of goes with also, Josh, and I'll finish with this, and you can just take the last two together. How do you raise funds? And man, we probably could do a whole episode just on that. But I'll just say this. Don't worry about the provision. If God's given you a vision, He's provided the land, things like that, He's going to provide it. But take your time on that as well. Don't get too far ahead of the Lord. Be willing to pause on a project if you don't have the funds. Um, I would say the things that are key are promotion and prayer, prayer and promotion. You pray about it and tell people about it. Tell people to pray about it. It's not you're not trying to fool people. You're like, listen, we're praying for this provision, and God may touch someone's heart, but God also may touch someone's heart to be a prayer word about it, and that'll be just as effective. Ask for groups to come if they're interested. There's always groups interested in that. Josh hit on this, and this is the part I would say: start out being willing to sacrifice yourself. There's no better way, I believe, in showing that a project is real in your heart than you as a family sacrificing to give. No one gave more to our first project, to the building of it, than we did personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from that, God bless other times. And every time you enter a project, think about what you can do to be the first one in line to give. And I think God's going to provide the funds. And so even have those phases broken down in funds. And I think you will see the Lord provide in His timing.
And I would just say, to summarize as we close out, when you're raising funds, don't ever write a letter or make a video update asking for funds if you're stressed out. Take a breath. You're excited about the project, but sometimes the stress can be overwhelming. And I would say you always want to emphasize vision-driven giving, not pressure-driven appeals for more money. Don't ever come off desperate. Oh, we need this. What's wrong with you people not helping? Cast the vision. People want, if you've already given toward it, hey, my wife and I are committing $5,000 for this project because we know God is in this. We are so excited, and we want you to have an opportunity to be involved in this ministry. And then have phase specific targets. Don't give the whole amount total. If somebody asks you, say, well, we want to raise 100,000 total, but hey, here's how we're breaking it down. We need a place to worship right away. We need this building, and we can do it for $25,000. That's it, And so break that down. Don't give vague totals. Well, we need this or that. Be very specific, and then just be transparent and give updates and reports when people are sending in, and ask questions. Always be transparent, and always invite people to come see the work and come help out. And so I would say those things is what helped us. Just always cast a vision, try to use social media to keep updates with what's going on, and just be transparent in your reporting and how the finances are being used and what God is doing. All of that, and God will bless. And we'll close out there. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Missionary Perspective podcast. We look forward to maybe expanding on some of these points in the near future. Erik, it's good to reconnect in the new year, and we're going to try to get as many episodes as we can this year. This is Josh Mead from Senegal, West Africa.
Erik Johnson, the Dominican Republic. Have a great day.
God bless.